The Buccaneers may not have made a big splash in free agency, but the pieces they've added might just be bringing something new to the defensive side of the ball and improving the team in the area that is needed the most.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. I'd like to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listen to you every day. I am your host, James Yarcho, writer over at Bucs Report. I've covered the Buccaneers for over a decade, and of course, he is Evan Klosky of 10 Tampa Bay and 10tampabay.com, and I am here with you every Monday through Friday along with the everydayers. For that, I'll share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. We are going to get Evan's best of the rest in free agency and see what he grades their free agent moves to this point. But Evan, since we spoke last and our recording went completely off the rails because that was the moment that the Max Crosby trade news broke, it was completely off. But since then, the Bucs have gone out. They signed defensive lineman A'Shawn Robinson. They signed edge rusher Al-Quadin Muhammad. Now, these weren't splash signings or household names, but they certainly help in some key areas where the Bucs struggled last season. What did you make of the signings, and what do you feel that those two guys bring to a team that just could not rush the quarterback consistently last season?
Look, I mean, they're savvy signings, right? I'm not here to say that the Buccaneers are now on their way to a Super Bowl because of it, but considering that the money used for both of those players probably equals what you would have had to pay Mike Evans, close enough. But for the most part, I think that, you needed to add beef in the defensive trenches. I fully imagine the Buccaneers are going to draft a defensive lineman. So let's say that they draft a defensive lineman. Your D-line room would be Vita Vea, Kalijah Cansey, A'Shawn Robinson, whoever you draft, Elijah Roberts, and Elijah Simmons. Like, that's all of a sudden a D-line that kind of looked weak last year. Certainly, look, if Vita or Cansey get hurt, it's still going to be a problem. But at least you have, A'Shawn who's kind of been there, done that, and can at least cosplay in a starter role. Versus last year, I mean, they really didn't have someone behind their top two guys who could step in and be everything that you needed him to be. It was Elijah Roberts being thrust into a run-stopping down. He was exposed. Elijah Simmons could run stop, but he couldn't really rush the passer, and he kind of got phased out by the end of it. Greg Gaines, it just the floor was getting lower and lower for him. So I really like what they did with Robinson. And then when you talk about Muhammad, I mean, look, he was the only NFL player last year who did not start a game who had double-digit sacks. Was that, being the beneficiary of playing next to Aiden Hutchinson? Maybe. I do like his tape. Is he going to have 11 sacks for the Bucs? I don't know, but he is. It would be great. But he is a guy that at least on obvious passing downs, which if you go back to a lot of his sacks, a lot of them did come in games where third down or second half, you're protecting a lead, whatever it might be, end of game stuff. Like, you can deploy him, and he should be able to get the job done, next to Yaya. And Yaya is great because he does so many things well. Certainly does great against a run. Obviously, he can do a little bit better against the pass. But, in a third down situation, you might be able to have some help now with a higher floor guy in Muhammad. But, yeah, I mean, you can't really complain. Whoever you're going to throw in there, it's going to be as positive. I spun Hassan Reddick as a positive last year when they signed him. You still got to do it, right? It seems great on paper. And to be honest, Reddick was supposed to have a higher ceiling last year entering the year than what you're paying Muhammad to do. So, my thing with Muhammad is you can't play him all downs. That's probably the one knock, but they just need pass rushers. So from that stance, I like it. Again, we imagine the Buccaneers are going to draft an edge rusher. Like, they're going to draft somebody who can pass rush. The thing is, when you look at this room, we still don't know what David Walker is. And that really is going to dictate what I feel about this group, because Yahya, Muhammad, insert draft pick, David Walker, Chris Braswell reads a little bit different if Walker is showcasing some of those things that made Larry Foote so excited when they drafted him. If David Walker gets injured again or is not quite what we think he could be, puts a lot of pressure on that draft pick, and we're right back to square one with this team. The fact is, we don't – entering the year, we will not have I will not feel confident about the pass rush until I see it. And that's really the problem. That's why fans want Max Crosby. That's why they wanted Trey Hendrickson. They wanted someone who they know when they step in day one, they can expect 10 sacks and, barring injury, but they can expect 10 sacks. They know what this person puts out on tape, and they're a top 10, top 15 type of player at their position. We're just not going to have that with the Buccaneers next year. And you hope whoever they draft maybe can surprise. But I tend to think that at that position, I think that's one of the hardest positions to transition into the NFL, playing off the edge. And it's usually even Jared Verse, when he started playing for the Rams, very special. But it wasn't like he was rattling off 15 sack season. Aiden Hutchinson was a top pick, one of the top. That sort of talent is what you need for me to change my opinion. When you're drafting a little bit, when you're not getting a top 5 pick, it's just tough to find. So, I like them. Am I 100% sold that these issues are fixed? No, but they're good players, and we like good players. That usually produces a good football team.
Yeah, we heard that the Bucs were in on Trey Hendrickson. They wanted a shorter term deal, obviously, and you and I talked about it in real time that, as soon as the Crosby trade was called off, it's like, oh, Trey Hendrickson's going to go to the Ravens. But when you take a look with Trey Hendrickson off the table, and you take a look at Muhammad versus some of the other edge rushers that were on the market, do you feel that maybe the Bucs got the guy with the highest upside rather than relying on an older guy with an injury history like a Joey Bosa, since that was a name that came up a lot?
Yeah, I mean, it just depends how you want to look at it. Yes, from an upside standpoint, sure, but it's still a 1-year deal. Sure. When Shaq came to the Bucs, it was great to have that upside until you had to pay him all this money to keep him, right? If Muhammad comes out and has 15 sacks, that's awesome. You're now going to have to pay him a ton of money to keep him, which, obviously is a good problem to have. But, Muhammad, at least up to this point, seems like he's been fairly durable. Obviously, he hasn't had the start and maybe doesn't get the amount of reps that somebody else does. There is something to be said about a guy like Joey Bosa, who's been there and done that. When he is healthy, usually can affect games. But yeah, I mean, typically when you hit your 30s, even with Trey Hendrickson and the back end of that Ravens contract, it's probably not going to be too pretty for them. They might not even make it there with all the guaranteed monies, which is typically how those things go. But typically at that age, you are going to plateau / start falling off. And so Muhammad, a late bloomer, you might have a little bit more juice left in there. And maybe he's a little bit emboldened now by that year in Detroit and thinks, hey, I can prove to everybody that I'm not just Aiden Hutchinson's wingman, right? I mean, there's plenty of motivation for him. Lions didn't take him back. He had 11 sacks and didn't get paid a whole chunk of money. So, I typically like the guys that have something to prove. Doesn't mean it works out for you. Again, Hassan Reddick, but it's certainly the mentality and the snarl. I think from a snarl perspective and a snarl rating, Robinson, Anzalone, Muhammad, like a 9.1 on SNARL. So that we like, because I think that is something that the team was lacking.
Yeah, they went out and signed themselves a couple of bullies, which is nice to have on the defensive side of the ball. All right, well, while the first wave of free agency is over, Evan is going to go through the best of the rest that the Bucs could look to improve the team. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. College basketball is nonstop. Big games, tight spreads, momentum swings every single night. From early tip-offs to late-night West Coast shootouts, there's always action on the board. And now FanDuel is giving you a way to turn that energy into even bigger potential wins with a college basketball parlay profit boost. You can build any college hoops parlay that you want, rivalry games, ranked matchups, whatever you want. You can mix spreads, totals, player props to match how you see the slate playing out. Then apply the profit boost and instantly bump up the potential payout. Michigan, Duke, and Arizona are the favorites to win the national championship, all tied at plus 380, followed by Florida at plus 900, Houston at plus 1100, and then Iowa State at plus 1600. Go safe, go bold, ride with the team you've been following all season. It's your parlay, your style now with more upside behind it. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. That's FanDuel.com. FanDuel, play your game. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day, and thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Join the Everydayer Club right now with code MARCH, MARCH, and get your first month free if you sign up before the NCAA tournament tips off this Thursday. You can compete against me as well as all of the other Locked On hosts in our men's and women's bracket pools on Discord. The winner in each is going to get $100 in Locked On merch. The rest of us can commiserate in the members-only chats as our brackets implode. Super excited for that to happen. All right. The Bucs still are not done filling out this roster. Not even close. Of course, we have the draft in a little over a month from now, where you're going to be adding, as of now, 7 new players to this team. That said, there are still lots of free agents out there, and you're going to see, these guys slowly start to join teams, and then there's going to be another mini wave of free agency after the draft to fill out needs that weren't addressed, during draft weekend. And then you'll have that third wave during training camp to replace guys who suffer injuries. So even though the first wave is done, free agency is basically going to last through the end of the year as teams continuously go and pick up new players. Evan, who are some of the guys that you see out there that would still be able to come in and help improve this Buccaneers roster, whether that's in a rotational role, a depth role, that Tampa could realistically look into bringing in?
Look, at this point, the Bucs don't have much money left. I'm going to guess, and I haven't looked at it the last couple of days. I'm going to guess, just think in your head, like about $5 million in cash left to spend, maybe. So we got to ask ourselves, like, what does this team need? Now, if Levante David were to come back, and let's say this team has about $5 million to spend, what is Levante David coming back asking for? Like, is Levante David signing for $3 million? Like, are you coming back and playing a whole nother season for $3 million?
Like, he did play for $4.5 million just a couple of years ago.
If you do $4.5 million, $4.5 million, like that might be it, right? Like that could be it. Also, maybe he wants to take a little bit of a pay cut in a little bit of a reduced role, ease his body in, kind of do some of that. But, if we're reading the tea leaves on what Levante David's going to do, I would say that might be a wee bit of some tea leaves, but we'll see, because in the end, there is no reason to talk about adding free agents if they bring in Levante David. Maybe they scrounge up some shekels for a cornerback, a veteran cornerback, which I'll get to in a minute. But mostly you're going to have to supplement with the draft now and those are going to have to be the rest of your backups because you kind of, spent the rest of your money, unless the Glazers, after the whole Mike Evans debacle, say, you know what, Levante's on us. Like, we're going to – Levante money we'll tuck aside. You continue to do your business. So, just food for thought there. But if we want to look at the linebacker position, which currently they have Anzalone and Servassier Dennis. So as it stands right now, you probably need 3 linebackers, right? Like, I mean, at least 2 that you're entering the season with. One has to be a special teamers. So if we're looking at guys that that you can maybe bring in, the options are honestly slim. So, I'm not even – some of these names to even give you, I think would just be, weird. Like, people aren't fans of Kenneth Murray. I get it. Around $5 million to play, third fiddle to whoever you draft, who's going to have to start for this team, is, he would be a backup, and that's just the way the backups work. They're not sexy. Christian Roseboom is another one. Not these sexy guys. Shaq Thompson is another guy. So those are the types of talents, because again, they are going to draft someone to start at linebacker. Like, the roster is telling us that. We know that. We can prognosticate that right now. What I'm looking at is really the cornerback position, because they need a veteran cornerback to sit behind Zion and BMO. And you probably have to draft one, but you might have to draft a little bit more of a developmental project, and it would be better suited for them to be the 4 than the 3. So removing Levante from the equation and whatever money he would bring in, you want to talk through guys like Rasul Douglas, Darnay Holmes, Adoree Jackson, Avante Maddox, Tre'Davious White, Ka'ir Elam. Like,
not Marshawn Lattimore?
They're not going to pay Marshawn Lattimore. And I don't think I think Buccaneers fans would say, you know what? I don't care if this man is going to help our team out. Just like Cameron Jordan, we don't want him. Don't make this offseason any worse than it's already been for fans. Hey, by the way, we're bringing in Cameron Jordan.
I had to say it just because, David Harrison and I were joking about it last week, and then I had mentioned it on the Squad Show. I was like, you know what? I think I've reached the point in free agency where I want Jason Light to do the full heel turn and just be as petty as possible and sign Marshawn Lattimore just in case they face San Francisco in the playoffs. Not really. Again, don't come after me with your pitchforks. But yeah, I had
no,
to
come at him. He can handle it. So really, like, for me, what I think you have to look at is there's really not much else to add. Like, when you're looking, if you want to go at home and look at players you kind of like and say, okay, where are those gaps on this team? Like, maybe they're maybe you're bringing back like a Tyler Johnson type at wide receiver if Sterling Shepard isn't coming back. I hope Shep is back, but right now they have 5 wide receivers with Godwin, Ibuka, McMillan, Tez Johnson, and Cameron Johnson. So maybe Garrett Green is ready to step into a role after a year on the practice squad. We'll see what happens, but that, like, in general, that's what if you want to have some fun at home. I'm giving you $5 million. You can probably sign a wide receiver 5 or 6, maybe another backup offensive lineman. I don't think it's 100% necessary now that you brought back Feeney. Like, maybe another outside linebacker. I don't think it's necessary considering you're going to draft one. Certainly look at the inside linebackers. Certainly look at the cornerbacks. And maybe a safety if you're not a believer in J.J. Roberts. But, like, that's kind of it. The team is almost set in stone when you factor in the draft.
Yeah, and of course, people are counting down to the draft. I'm excited about it. I'm excited I'll be at Ohio State's Pro Day with David Harrison next week. That should be
fine institution that will hopefully clean yourself up.
I'm wearing Illinois stuff while I'm there. All right. Professor Klosky hands out his grades. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. Ever hired someone who looked good on paper but wasn't the right fit? You know how important that is. When you want candidates who truly match what you're looking for, trust Indeed sponsored jobs. If you're hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs puts your post at the top of the page and helps you reach the right candidates faster. Indeed sponsored jobs helps your listing stand out and reach quality candidates, and they boost your post to the people who are the best match for your role. That makes the real difference. Spend more time interviewing candidates who check all of your boxes with less stress, less time, more results using Indeed sponsored jobs. Listeners of this show get a $75 sponsored job credit to help give your job the premium placement it deserves at Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL. Just go to Indeed.com/LockedOnNFL right now and support the show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring, do it the right way with Indeed. Wrapping things up here on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. And to recap, the Buccaneers have brought in Alex Anzalone, Kenneth Gainwell, A'Shawn Robinson, Al-Quadin Muhammad, Jake Browning, and Miles Killebrew. They retained Cade Otton, Keeft, and Dan Feeney. They have tendered Sean Tucker. On the flip side, they lost Mike Evans, Rashad White, who could not get out of town fast enough, and then only got like a league minimum deal. Christian Izzian, Logan Hall, and Jamel Dean. They still have 10 guys that were on the team last year that are available in free agency as of right now at this moment, including Lavonte David, who, as we just talked about, if he does play, will only play for Tampa. Then Hassan Reddick, Greg Gaines, Sterling Shepard, Kendall Vildor, Deion Jones, Anthony Walker Jr. Evan, what would you grade the Bucs free agency moves so far this year?
In totality, I lean towards a C-. Like, because here's the thing. I like the Anzalone addition. I like Gainwell. I like Robinson. I like Muhammad. I like bringing back Otton. I like all those moves. The thing that you needed a star pass rusher to elevate this defensive group. And it seems like for the 90th year in a row, I'm going to be on Locked On Bucs complaining about this all season. You did not address the biggest need on this team. And you're going to, I'm sure, do some of that in the draft. And it will, we'll see when the season begins how that's going to work out. Like, again, the asterisk is David Walker's legit. You draft a stud, and then all of a sudden I can eat all these words and I'll, give a huge tip of the cap to Jason Light, say, I was wrong, you were right. That's why you sit in that position and I sit in my butt over here. But in the end, everybody at home knows, and we all complained about it, you need a pass rush. And it feels like they whiffed. It feels like they whiffed and they had to settle for Muhammad. And again, I like the Muhammad signing. That's why it's average. Like, it's a C-. It's nothing to get excited about. It's savvy work. Robinson is savvy work. Gainwell, savvy work. Anzalone, you needed it. You got it. It's a little bit, it's average. It's what I expected this team to do. But C- because you also lost Mike Evans. And in some respect, I think some fans out there might be a little bit of a harder grader than I am. But you can't tell me that you're like, I believe in this wide receiver room of Godwin, Ibuka, McMillan. It's a strong three. With Mike Evans, it's a totally different unit. And you're going to have to convince me that this offense is going to be able to elevate without Mike. Because when Mike has been off the field, that is when we have seen a deflated offense. Historically speaking, for this team, it's a new offensive coordinator. I'm not going to put that baggage on Zach Robinson. But I look at this team the same way that I looked at the team last year, and with maybe a little less of a glimmer in my eye. This is a good team. I don't know if they're a great team. This is an 8, 9, 10-win team, maybe gets you a dub in the playoffs. I do not think this team is competing for a Super Bowl title. And from that perspective, I go back to the whole Mike Evans rant I had. Like, what are we doing here? It feels like you're straddling the middle between being a decent product to watch, but not a good enough product to get excited about. That's the reality of where I feel like this team is. And a lot of players are going to have to, A, stay healthy, which we haven't seen in a while, but B, elevate their game to prove that this is a Super Bowl winning team. Baker Mayfield is going to have to force the Bucs to regret the fact that they did not extend him and that he's going to be worth $50 million. You're going to need Chris Godwin to look like the guy we saw a couple of years ago, Emeka Egbuka to take that next step. The offensive line, if they can all stay healthy, that is a legit O-line. What happens if one goes down? Tristan Wirfs is typically injured every year now. Luke Gedeke has been getting injured every year. Cody Malk is coming off of a torn ACL. That's not an easy injury to come back on.
No, it's not.
So you have Kalijah Cansey, who can't suit up for a full season. Vita Vea is a year older and tapered out at the end of the last year. I already mentioned the outside linebackers. The inside linebackers, right now there are 2 on the roster. Cornerbacks, you're depending on Zion, Bemo, Jacob Parrish with nothing behind them, so none of those guys can get injured. And then you have Antoine Winfield Jr., Tyke Smith, and none of those guys can get injured. It's just it's tough. The depth I don't think is completely there. The draft is going to help some of these complaints, but in the end, I just think they're a good team. And there are much worse things you could be. You could be the Jets, coming from a guy who grew up a Jets fan, right? You could be what the Browns have been for a decade and a half, right? There are worse places to be, and don't feel like going back to the decade of darkness is something you want to risk, because I know the Glazers don't. But the reality is you have to do something transformative to really shift the tide of this team becoming a contender. They did that with Tom Brady. They brought in an X factor who brought in a bunch of other pieces who transformatively changed the makeup of this team. I just haven't seen that type of I haven't seen the Glazers or this organization kind of put it all on the table and say, let's go for it. It's a lot of straddle. It's a lot of straddle, and it smells like, to me, wanting to keep your options open for 2027 in a loaded quarterback class. That's what, and not to mention a loaded draft class, period, but certainly a loaded quarterback class.
Well, and it's like you said last week, pick a lane. Either you're contending or you're rebuilding. At this point, being average, being in the middle, if you are going to move on and keep your options open in a loaded quarterback class, pick 15 isn't going to get it done. So, either you're in or you're out, and I agreed with that assessment. Of course, we'll revisit Professor Klosky's grading scale here in about a month and a half when the draft rolls through and we start to get an even more clear picture of what this roster looks like. But Evan, what do we have going on over at 10 Tampa Bay, 10tampabay.com, and the 10 Tampa Bay News app?
Yeah, just make sure that you check out the 10 Tampa Bay News app, especially, if you're filling out your brackets and all that stuff. I mean, our friends at Locked On over here are just crushing it, and we have a great partnership. So we're getting you set for the bracket. We're going to cover March Madness all the way through. You can watch the games on 10 Tampa Bay. We'll be covering USF in their first game against Buffalo on Thursday. They have practice tomorrow, or if you listen to this on Wednesday at 11 o'clock, we'll see them play on Thursday at 1:30. The Valspar Championship is this week. We got games in Tampa. It's going to be beautiful all weekend. So we got you covered.
Yep, you are going to want to check all of that out. Please follow everything on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at Yarcho_Bucs, at eKlosky WTSB. Follow on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. join the Everydayer Club. You can compete in a bracket challenge that'll win you $100 of Locked On swag. Use promo code MARCH for your first month free. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to join the Everydayer Club, it's pretty simple. Like this episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. Want to thank you so much for joining us right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.